to Writing in the West podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Offhammer, and our guest this week is seasoned journalist and writing professor Laurie L. Dove. Her debut novel, Mask of the Deer Woman, is the culmination of a lifetime of craft and advocacy.
Here. I'm
Hi, how are
here.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me today and talk Mask of the Deer Woman. I'm excited.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. I am such a huge fan of your publications. So
Great,
this is a
great.
dream for me.
Perfect, perfect. Well, and before we get into the interview, I think that there's just been such a tide lately, it seems like, of just really, really good Indigenous content. From we just had Dark Winds on the cover, and I interviewed Ann Hillerman about her series, and now it was so cool to read Mask of the Deer Woman as much as I've been able to get through, and to hear your story too. It's really cool because I think for so long, even our publication, it's been so cowboy and not so Indian. And it's so cool to see that tide start to turn and to hear these stories that really don't get told. And I'm glad to have you on and be a part of that.
Oh, well, it's so lovely. And I'm with you. I have seen this rising tide, and it is so encouraging. And I just love all of the different voices we're hearing from in a way that I don't think we really have before.
No,
So it's an exciting time.
no. This is your debut novel after a long and exciting career in journalism, and other things, a creative writing instructor. You wear many hats, and we're just so glad to have you on and talk about your book. So, for those of us listening that maybe don't know much about you, Laurie, can you give us a little bit of your past and your career before you wrote Mask of the Deer Woman?
Well, thank you for my career is as a journalist, and I have really enjoyed that. Being a writer was my earliest dream. And so I went into journalism and really found meaning in being able to tell other people's stories and honor those in the best way that I was able to. When I was able to write Mask of the Deer Woman, it was really these parts of stories that I've carried with me for my entire life. Plus, this research that I was able to do during the book, you can see my journalism showing as we talk about endangered species and the very real crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. But I especially loved being able to bring these characters to life. That was my favorite thing about it.
Definitely. And what about, after having such a, distinguished career as a journalist, why did you want to write a novel? What was the impetus of that for you?
My work over the years has been moving to longer and longer forms. And what I especially like about long form journalism or working as a novelist is that it has this staying power. I love the idea that someone might pick up this book 10 years from now and still find it in some ways relevant to them. And that to me feels like the kind of legacy that I would like to leave.
Well, and I've got a minor past in journalism as well, and I'm sure the word count limits were a bit difficult for you too, as I often found. And you mentioned a great point about the staying power of novels, and I think what we've found in the authors that we've spoke to in the past, and you as well, is that they also open up these larger conversations about, like you mentioned, the endangered species, the real world issues facing Indigenous women and these tribes. Was there a particular case or story that inspired Mask of the Deer Woman, or was it just kind of something that had been ruminating throughout your career?
It really started with the character of Carrie Starr. And in this character, I saw a lot of things that I didn't know yet, but that I wanted to explore. And I liked a lot of her complexities and the way she's often opposite in the things that she does and thinks. And being able to follow her along that journey and get to know her as a character was really rewarding for me. And along the way, I found that all of these things that I sort of carried in my consciousness bubbled up into this character. And it was a really interesting way to explore a lot of these big what if questions that I have about the world.
That's so cool. And, I think that that's something that you've touched on that is so prevalent in, the types of authors and writers that we have today. It's that these are ways not only to inform readers about these interesting topics and really important topics and issues, but also a learning experience. What was that process like for you? Because, novels are so different, than, a career in journalism. And were you a sit down, 9 to 5, I've got to bust this out? Did it come in chunks? How much of this was research and on location visits for you?
It was a combination of all of those things. So there were points in writing this novel that I did it very methodically, but there was also a 4 day stretch when I wrote 60,000 words that ended up being the middle of the book. And so it has been all of those things, which really kind of reflects my career as a journalist. It was great training for writing a novel. I learned to write everywhere. I learned to write fast. I learned to write no matter what else was going on. And those things all served me well. And even the research aspect of it, I really found that, like I did with my journalism, I really began with people. And as I would write the story, I would then research, but I would only research as it pertained to the story, as opposed to just really getting bogged down in that and spending lots of time doing it, because that deadline is still always in the back of my mind, mostly self imposed at this point, but always there. And after I wrote the atmospheric location qualities of the book from memory, from imagination, I did take an extended research trip with one of my daughters when we were on a location for quite some time. And I wanted to make sure that I had it right. And I was very relieved to find out that I did. We went at the same time of year that the book is set. And I thought, oh, thank goodness. I got it.
Definitely. And, as a reader myself, and I'm sure other readers of your book will attest, I became so quickly engrossed in the landscape and the place where Mask of the Deer Woman is set. When you were trying to translate that world, and in a lot of ways, the starkness of that area of the world, but also with, the really interesting and unique and almost inspiring, um, you know, ideas of that landscape. How did what's your process like for trying to translate that into your story?
I spent a lot of time growing up outside, a lot of time in pastures on horseback, and all of those things I think really showed in this story as far as being an observer of the natural landscape and the creatures within it. Um, as I was writing this, I really focused on watching those scenes play out in my mind as if I'm looking at the setting and then just transcribing it, almost like I would do as a journalist, interviewing myself, taking note of the scene and doing my best to relay that. The biggest distance to bridge is from the brain to the page. And so I spend a lot of time thinking. I spend a lot more time thinking than I ever do writing. I write really quickly, but it's the decision making about where the story would go that was new for me, because in journalism, that was really already decided before I got there. And so that decision making process is really where I spent a lot of time doing other things outside while I would work through some of the snags that I hit with the book.
That's great. Well, and I'm sure being a quick writer lent itself well to putting together such a long work compared to more journalistic endeavors. And you touched on a good point there. When you're tackling a real life news article or a longer feature piece, everything's already there. The story has been written, really. And with this one, it's coming from a much different place, whether that be the head or the heart or the spirit. Were there any surprises along the way for you, or places that you said, "Wow, I really didn't kind of foretell that it was going in this place, but it just seems so natural."
Most of the book is a surprise to me. And that's my favorite thing about fiction. I like to write until it surprises me. And these characters frequently did. I would have something in mind and we would get to a certain point, and that is not at all what would happen. I would often find that narrative flipped on its head. And I think that's really what I liked about the process of doing it. And that discovery was a lot like how I worked as a journalist, where I would just follow the story wherever it led. And that's what I feel like I did with this book, with these characters, especially because it's a very character driven story. And I'm excited to keep going on that journey with them because it's now a series, and I am excited to see what Star is up to next.
Yeah, and you've made a great point about the surprise being such an interesting part of writing a story from your perspective, and you've been on the publishing side, I believe, and you also work as a creative writing instructor. And how different was it to be in the driver's seat instead of the review process or the grading process? How different was that for you?
It is a piece of what I've been doing all along, as is publishing, as is teaching. I could talk about writing, read about writing all day long. It's my favorite thing. And so to be in the community with other writers who are interested in doing the same thing is one of the best things in my life. But bringing all this together, it does sound very different to have been a publisher, owned a publishing company for a time, to be a writing professor, and then to do the work of writing. But really, I think for me, they're all one thing. I don't really compartmentalize those things. That's really how I've tried to live my life without that compartmentalization. I grew up on a working farm and ranch, and we were family and we worked, and all of those things went together all day long. And so that's really the approach that I still bring to my life, to really um, bring all these kind of disparate parts of my life together.
I get the sense that, especially in terms of your world of writing, that you find a lot of value in the community aspect of it. And were there any people in your life that were involved in maybe reviewing parts of your story, or the research phase? I know you mentioned you took your daughter with you. What was that writers community like for you while writing Mask of the Deer Woman?
I have such a beautiful community around me, whether it would be this project or a different one. I have five daughters, and I've always said to them, if it's interesting to you, it's interesting to me. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it is. And that's really our family's approach to each other. I only had two people read it before it went to the publisher. My husband, who I'm sorry to say, had to read it like 2 dozen times. I am working so hard for him not to have to read it that many times for this second one. And then a dear friend that I actually grew up with, who is just this brilliant, well read person who I trust. And so after they read the book, I thought, okay, this is going to be okay. This is something that I can do.
That's great. And you know it best, from being a publisher, that I think in 2025, more so than ever, we're just so inundated with so many stories in so many different ways, whether it be TV or books or what have you. And what was that process like with finding a publisher and getting published, especially as a first-time novelist?
I have the most, I think, unusual story, and it's such a joy to be able to share. So, I had just completed a master's degree at Harvard. I'm a first gen college student, both undergrad and the master's degree I earned. And I walked across the stage right before I turned 50. And I wanted to finish that program with a manuscript. And it afforded me the time to set aside to really focus on that. Because as a journalist with other pressing deadlines, it was always pushed to the bottom of the list. And I kind of like that instant gratification of journalism, to see your work out in the world. So I went through that process and I had a manuscript and I was querying agents. And my idea is that I'm just going to keep my head down and work because I'm very good at the working part of it. And I'll make the effort to find the agent or, to get this book published. But if not this book, the next one or the next one or the next one. And I finished this manuscript, began querying agents, began writing the next book. And I learned of an open submission for unagented writers from Penguin Random House with the Berkeley imprint, submitted and promptly put it out of my mind and continued to do the work. And they actually contacted me about 18 months later. And I am very happy to say I have found a home with Berkeley. They are so smart and lovely and passionate about what they do. And I'm really honored to be a part of it.
That's great. And 18 months, it's you have to almost put it out of your mind with the patience aspect. But, I think that we've found in just the past few months of trying to build our own showcase of writers and modern writers that the novel is alive and well for a lot of people. And, you've I think you've already done some stops, right, with readers and different events with this book. What has been the feedback with readers who may have surprised you with, the outpouring of support?
Well, that outpouring of support at all is really what surprised me. I did not expect to be surrounded by this reader community like I was and like I am now. And that has been my favorite thing about it. I am one of those people in the reader community. I have my authors that I love, and they're automatic purchases for me every time. And I can't wait for their next book to come out. And for me to even have a small part of that experience as a writer has been such a shock and a joy all at once. And I've really liked the way that people have gone into the book with an open mind because Star is not an easy person to love. And then also the conversations we've had about these characters afterward. Um, I've had some really fun conversations that really felt like Star was a real person. Someone came when someone in my family stopped by and they were like, okay, she can drink and she can smoke, but not both, not at the same time. It was like an intervention. And I was like, yes, I know. And then I just had to laugh because I thought, oh, right, I made her up. So this experience has really just been so fun.
That's great. Well, speaking of, we've danced around it for a little bit, but let's get into Mask of the Deer Woman and your characters. You know, right from the beginning, and I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but the stakes are pretty high. Right from the opening pages of the book, and you're well read, I can tell, and you've got a lot of experience. But how important was it to really set the tone from page one for you in Mask of the Deer Woman?
I really felt like that was critical for me because as a journalist, that's really how I tried to approach every story. And I think that's reflected in this as well. Instead of thinking about, oh, how do I construct this lead? I would think, what's the point? And that's really the prologue of this book was, this story of, what's the point here? And I like the way that that really carries the reader right into this way that the larger story unfolds then.
And we do it through the lens of your protagonist, and she's, I guess, in essence, a fish out of water in the truest sense of the term, and that she's this hardened Chicago cop who finds herself, on her own, pretty much trying to tackle some pretty important issues, and dealing with her own issues at the same time. And one thing that struck me about your protagonist was just how three-dimensional she is, and how you really could see this kind of person. Everything just made sense about how she had ended up based on, and I don't want to give too much away on the experiences that she's gone through, but I get the sense that you really started off this story with trying to portray it through your characters. How difficult was that? And how did you overcome those challenges?
Yes, I went into this knowing that any type of plotting was going to be my element that needed the most work because I was the least experienced in that way. And the ability to approach it from a characterization standpoint really felt natural for me. I think all my stories start with people, and I didn't even know what type of book I was writing. I only knew that I had this character and that there was a younger character that was in some kind of peril. And I wanted to see what the interchange between these two characters would be. And I really just followed that for the story. I did have the end in mind when I wrote it. I already knew what the ending was. And it's really the same ending that still exists in the story.
Well, and you do a lot of work with setting the not only the stage in terms of the location, with showing the real authentic life of, reservation people and the law enforcement that's tasked with helping to police these communities. And how much research went into that, and how important was it to you to get it right?
Oh, getting it right was the most important thing. If it wasn't right, this book shouldn't be out there.
Yeah.
And so we worked really extensively with an authenticity reader after the book was written, who had lived experience on a reserve and knew more of the cultural aspects of it that I don't know. And that was really important to me. And I was very gratified to hear back from them that I'd really gotten that right in,
Yeah.
99% of those instances as well. So I'll always work with an authenticity reader. I think that's a really crucial part of these stories. But I was also a councilwoman and the mayor of my town. And when you're the mayor, you get to see all kinds of things happening and all of these systems and the way they work. And having that inside look at the way that government functions and the way that police departments function was really crucial for me in doing this. I didn't become mayor to use it in a story, but it did come in handy later.
Definitely. Yeah. And one thing I really thought was really interesting about your writing style and the almost symbolic aspects of this book was you were able to weave kind of real life authenticity, especially with the indigenous element, with a lot of the folklore and parts of their spirituality that really permeate everyday life. And was that something, because so many books, they're just so full of symbolism, and yours is as well. How difficult is that to weave those into a story? And what was your plan for doing that?
I would like to say I had a big plan, but I did not. I knew all of these things that I wanted to have in the story because they were all things that I liked or that interested me. And when I began writing it, I didn't know what kind of book it was going to end up being. And I'm very pleased with how it turned out. But being able to weave all of these things together was interesting to me. And I think it's really a time capsule of my life at the time. But I do really enjoy reading magical realism. And I had just come off a lot of reading of Annie Prue and Louise Erdrich and Richard Ford and Craig Johnson and all of these authors that I really enjoy. And that paired with my rural farm ranch background, I think really just showed. And because I wanted to write um, being able to draw on the experiences that I had. Now, that only went so far. I am Indigenous by heritage, but I was adopted as an infant by a Mennonite family and raised on this farm and ranch. And um, so that part of it, I really felt like we needed to pull the authenticity reader in. But the rest of it, I was really able to draw on things that were that I'd experienced or that were adjacent to things that I had experienced, and that really helped.
And to just backstep for just a second, this book is really, at least from the early parts of this story, about mothers and daughters. And you told me you have five daughters of your own, and I won't even ask, if that was inspired by real life events, because you're probably very capable of doing that. But why was that a subject that you wanted to tackle in this book?
That too was almost unintentional. When I write, when things are coming from within me as opposed to reporting on things without me, I often find that I write about those familial relationships, and mothers and daughters is really a topic that has come up for me again and again. I've a lot of short stories that I've explored that have these things, and it really isn't even intentional. I just had such a lightning bolt of realization when I had my children that this love was so powerful that there were things maybe I'd allowed in my life that I would never allow to happen to them, right? Like I felt like such a protector and wanting all of these best things for them, and that feeling of standing between them and the world. And that's really a feeling that translates into lots of other relationships now that my daughters are grown or nearly grown and very capable and courageous and intelligent women. But I do find that feeling is so universal. And that's something that I really enjoyed exploring in Mask of the Deer Woman.
And it really is a story that's so propelled by female characters. And I'm sure you, as such a seasoned reader and writer yourself, how important is it for, young girls, especially, I'm a former high school teacher myself, and to have those, you know, markers in stories that they're reading, seeing the capabilities, but also showing, that, women in your stories, especially, they would act so differently, than a male character would. But to find that that's a strength, of these characters. And was that something that was intentional for you? And, have you seen that in the readers that you've encountered of your book?
Mm. Yes, I've gotten a lot of good feedback about that, which I am pleased about. I really want to see representation. I like the characters who have had terrible things happen to them in their lives that get up every day and do it anyway. They move forward, even if they're dragging themselves along sometimes. Because I think in our lives, we've probably all known someone, it might even be us, who have had to do that and just really get through something. And I think that resilience in characters is especially interesting, but I think especially in women. And for all of these people who are able to read the book to see this representation of smart, capable, struggling humans,
Right.
I think is really what my goal was.
Definitely. That's great. And um to think about the indigenous aspect of this book again, obviously a very big part, and I don't think I'm giving away any spoilers here by saying it, is, this ongoing issue of, the missing indigenous women that just seems to plague this community. And without getting too much into the story of Mask of the Deer Woman, do you kind of view your book as a call to action in a sense? And if so, what is that call to action for your readers?
That's really my hope because I want the work that I do to make a positive impact. And I felt that way from the beginning, even when I was writing stories at my college newspaper, years ago. And I hope that's true for this book. I have seen some people take action on this, and that to me is such a joy. I have a reader who is a 92-year-old woman who stayed up all night to finish it. And the moment she was done, she donated a semester of college funds to a Native organization in memory of Chenoweth.
Wow.
or in honor of Chenua. And that to me was just such a gift as a writer to see that someone had been so moved by this that real world positive action happened. And I could only hope that it does have that impact on people.
Definitely. And it seems like it already has in just its early days so far. And you did tease it at the beginning that this is the first in a series with some of these characters. I won't say who is remaining, but obviously Star, your main protagonist. And did you set out to make this a series? And also, what's the status of book two, and how is that coming along?
I didn't start out to make it a series. My goal was really to write this first book. And once I did that, I knew that there was so much more to this character. There is a whole lifetime to explore with her, and I don't want to give that up. So I'm very, very excited that this is now a series and that other people see this in her as well. So the second book, I'm editing that now. It will arrive in summer of 2026 and we'll have another book after that. So I'm very excited to be able to share Star's life with everyone.
That's perfect. Well, I'm sure me and all of your readers will be eagerly looking forward to that. And my last question is just now that you've entered this novelist phase of your life and career, what has been the best part?
Ooh, I think the best part is that I am living this life right now. I have never been happier. This is exactly what I had always hoped and envisioned my life would be. And that is such a joy to wake up to every day. I want to write books every day for the rest of my life and talk about books with people like you. And that is I think, my highest, best calling.
Great. Well, we're eagerly looking forward to book two. And if anyone hasn't picked up Mask of the Deer Woman, please do. If you won't be disappointed, as I was in either. Thank you so much, Laurie. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy editing and writing schedule, and we look forward to seeing you back for book two.
It's been my pleasure, and I would love to come speak with you again. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.